Finance Committee. Okay, roll call.
Ms. Beebe? Ms. Beebe's present. Mr. Bennett?
Here.
Mr. Bennett's present. Ms. Bophy? Here. Ms. Bophy's present. Ms. Bradford? Here. Ms. Bradford's present. Ms. Dastu? Ms. Dastu's absent. Mr. Garvey? Mr. Garvey's present. Mr. Gio?
Present.
Mr. Gio's present. Ms. Hill? Present. Ms. Hill's present. Mr. Lee?
Present.
Mr. Lee present. Ms. Orange Jones?
Present.
Ms. Orange Jones present. Mr. Romer?
Here.
Mr. Romer present. Chairman, we have a quorum.
Good. Okay, first item.
Your consent agenda is ready. We are adding items 5.3, 6.1, 6.3, and 8.1, and we are pulling item 2.5 off of the consent agenda.
Okay, we have a recommendation. Is there a motion? Have a motion to approve the consent agenda. Is there a second?
I'll second that.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Any objection? Motion carries. So we're pulling item 2.5.
Right. We are now on item 2.5 on page 38. Consideration of LDE contracts approved by the co-chairs of the Administration and Finance Committee, the BESE President, and 2 other BESE members appointed by the co-chairs of the Administration and Finance Committee. The department recommendation is to receive. We are pulling this item because there is an additional contract that was approved by this delegated subcommittee. It was not included in the packet when it was originally mailed out. You do have a copy. There was a copy emailed to you, and you also should have one in front of you right now.
Oh, well, that disappoints me. I thought this item, the reason for bringing it up was to remove me from the approval. You can still do that now. Okay, so this item is for consideration and approval. Is that correct?
No, these 2 contracts have already been approved. The board needs to receive.
I'll move receive.
Okay. Motion and second to receive the report. Any discussion?
I do have a question regarding the emergency contract, and certainly I recognize the fact that there are deadlines, timelines established, but it appears that we're getting a number of these contracts, and I just want to voice my concerns relative to the number of emergency items. Does anyone care to speak to it?
Ms. Sienna?
I'll just say that, point noted, I think we are, and I share the concern about the process for how the board has been notified of these instances. We're going to take corrective action to make sure that we have a better process, and I'll work with Deputy Superintendent CNO to make sure that happens, but I share the sentiment.
I appreciate it.
Mr. Chairman?
Ms. Dusty.
I think this would be a really good time, particularly with the finance chairs, and not Mr. Lee, obviously, as well, but I think with Mr. Gio as the co-chair of finance, and any other BESE member who wants to maybe get a little deeper on information around contracts. It's always a difficult, and it's a huge task and a big responsibility. If we could organize something with Ms. CNO and with BESE staff, we'll be happy to set that up. Mr. Gio and I have had the same conversation. So, thank you.
Okay, any further discussion?
Okay, we're going to do a contract briefing. I think I can say that a little more
We
succinctly
got to act on it.
with Ms. CNO and BESE staff, and any interested BESE member.
Okay, if there's no further discussion, is there any opposition to the motion on the floor? Seeing none, motion carries. Next item.
The next item is item 4.1 on page 64, a consideration of discussion of the MFP formula. There are actually 3 motions that are required under this item. The first is the approval of the MFP studies agenda, and the department recommends that you approve.
Ms. CNO, any comments you want to make?
It would be appropriate at this time if for some reason this agenda needed to be added to. The board usually would give us some sort of idea of what it might want us to explore. Not that that can't be done at a later date, but these are the things that we brought forth today that we feel need to be addressed over the next, 6 to 8 months.
Okay, Chair would entertain a motion.
I'll make a motion to approve. I'd like to make a suggestion
Now,
to add to the study
Well,
agenda.
Can we, wait, let's get a
Okay.
second to the motion first. Is there a second? Okay, we have a second.
The board consider whether or not it should include prospective language in MFP resolutions going forward.
I hadn't heard that
We put that on the
before,
study
but-
agenda. That wound is still fresh.
Maybe this will be a healing process.
Mr. Lee, could you clarify that request, please?
I'll ask the superintendent to clarify it. That's a discussion between he and Ms. Dusty.
I believe that some of the, there have been people who have said that the language in the current MFP resolution looks at impact in years hence, and that that's not appropriate for a resolution that is supposed to address this year specifically, and that was raised in some difficult discussions, and we will consider it putting such stipulations in future MFPs.
Right. In future resolution, future years.
Future years, yeah.
Any further discussion? Okay, we have a motion for approval. Any objection to the motion? Hearing none, motion carries. Next
And
item.
the next motion under this item is to receive the FY 2010-11 70% instructional evaluation results, and the department recommendation is to receive.
You have that information in your packet. The chair would entertain a motion to receive the 70% academic requirement.
I'll make a motion to receive, but,
Okay, we have a motion. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Motion and second. Mr. Roman.
I'd like to add to future reports an item, a column, if possible, Beth, Ms. Eno. In addition to the accountability score, maybe the previous year's accountability score as well. 'Cause I'm just interested in the trajectory of some of these schools. I mean, there may in fact be a school that's not spending 70% for whatever reason, but the trajectory of their score is excellent. I'd certainly like to know that. I think it's relevant information, and vice versa. Is the trajectory going in the wrong direction? So if we can include an additional year, the previous year's score, in another column, that'd be useful information for me.
Are you suggesting it for all the districts or
Yeah,
just the ones
on
below
page
70?
on page 67
Yeah.
and 68, I would include it in all. I certainly would include it on those that aren't spending 70%. But I think it's probably pretty easy to do it for all of them.
Right. And as far as the data element, that certainly can be done. The main reason it's here is because that is the provision, the waiver that you yourselves had adopted, that if they are, failing, but yet they have good outcomes, they get a pass with regards to compliance. But we can certainly add, that data on this sheet for you in the future. Be glad to.
Thank you.
Any other?
Mr. Lee, and
Discussion.
just additional clarification, Ms. Beth. So those districts that don't meet the 70% instructional requirement and they are failing, what is the procedure? I mean, is there a process in place where staff meets with the district heads and discuss ways to corrective action?
Right. For those districts that do not meet the requirements, we have a process that we require certain actions from them when they do not meet it, and the scores are, don't qualify for the waiver as well. Then we send them information and ask that they do a corrective action plan, a detailed corrective action plan on how they're going to look at their expenditures, even to the extent that they examine certain ways that they can save money, perhaps on their non-operational costs, and that they detail that out for us by our due date. And then we monitor that throughout the year to see whether or not that's helped them any and if their actions have actually been implemented. And we do come back to the board and report to you on those activities as well.
Now, do you have instances where you have consecutive years where they're violating the corrective action process?
Well, we do have some districts who have had challenges that have existed for years that have not allowed them to meet that requirement. They're really special circumstances, and we try to note that on an annual basis, whether or not that special circumstance. Like in a very rural district, there's a couple of them who have always told us that their transportation costs are so high, it will be always be very difficult for them to reach that percentage. But we do look at that, and we do. There are some that have, had it for multiple years. We ask them to go back and tweak every year. Perhaps things that they've tried in the past have not worked, and therefore we try to encourage them and give them assistance on other things that they may need to look at. So we do that on an annual basis.
Thank you.
Any further discussion? Any objection to the motion? Motion carries.
Okay,
Next
the
one.
last motion on this item is a status report of the student-based budgeting pilot, which that report starts on page 73, and the department recommendation is to receive.
I'll make that motion.
Second.
I have a motion and a second to receive. Any discussion?
I would like to say a few words, if I may. Mr.
Okay.
Chairman. As you know, we embarked on this student-based budgeting pilot over a year ago now, and I just want to emphasize what a good learning experience it has been. I think that was the initial intent of the experience amongst the districts and the department, to look into this activity and see how it would benefit our districts. I certainly appreciate all the cooperation and the dedication of the districts who did see this initiative through, and I think their insight perhaps will help us build some tools. Our goal is to have tools available from the department should other districts decide to look at this in the future. We do have two superintendents today, Mr. Tibby Martinez and Mr. Philip Martin from the districts that did participate, that I think would like to say a few words if that was okay with the board.
Please.
Superintendent, did you want to make some comments? Tippy. We got the bad leading the bad here now.
I'm telling you.
got-
Good morning. I'm Philip Martin, Superintendent, Terrebonne Parish. When we began this endeavor, we were piloting student-based budgeting. As we began this endeavor, most of us had not heard the term and were not very familiar with it, so it was kind of a foreign term to us. When we first began, we moved from looking from some type of format or recipe that defines student-based budgeting. Give us a rule book, and we want to follow those rules. With Beth's guidance and many people that came to speak to us, we began to slow realization it's not about a rule book, a recipe, nor a format. Student-based budgeting is a concept, more of a philosophy than an ironclad set of rules. With student-based budgeting in Baltimore may not be the same as student-based budgeting in California, and it can be whatever you choose to make it. What the concept it is, it's to empower those, and we came to this realization, to empower those closest to the children to have impact and control over the utilization of resources, typically money. Let those closest to the children make decisions how those resources will be best in the interest of the kids. When we came to that realization, we almost simultaneously came to the realization we are very close, and I say we, I'm speaking in my district, in our district, we're very close to student-based budgeting as we speak. We probably just didn't know we were doing it that way, because we do empower principals. We do give the local communities great control over how the resources are utilized in their schools. As Beth said, it was very informative, very steep learning curve for principals when it comes to finances. They began to realize it's so much more than just teacher salaries. That if you do student-based budgeting, things they've never had to worry with, when a teacher has a lot of sick days and has unfortunately sickness out for a long time, they go hire a sub. That wasn't their problem. sabbatical leaves, maternity leaves, the cost of insurance and retirement. Those things have, not things that principals focus on or have much awareness of, quite honestly, in their day-to-day life. So it was very informative for principals, and I think they learned a great deal from this endeavor. We're planning to pursue still refining what we do in our district, and it's been mentioned in some of your proceedings earlier today and some recent legislation. Principals have been empowered by this legislation, and we will continue to empower principals and schools to make decisions as they see fit to impact children in positive ways. One thing we learned student-based budgeting does not do, it does not manufacture any money for you. It doesn't crank up more printing presses and say, give you more. It's just a utilization of what you have. And as dwindling resources and increasing expenses, as you combine those two, it even becomes more imperative to utilize all resources in the most effective manner. So we appreciate the opportunity to participate. It is an important tool. It's not the silver bullet, but I do think it's a valuable component in that continuing the drive for increased student achievement. Thank you.
Good.
It's been quite an experience, okay? The principals come back and forth
Kip,
to you.
do y'all mind telling us who you are? I know
I'm
some
sorry,
of us
Walter.
know, but everybody might know.
Timmy Martinez, Superintendent of Assumption Parish Schools. Like I said, it's been quite an experience for myself, for the principals. I need to give credit to the business managers, to the principals, and to the State Department staff for putting it together and coming up with a pilot. We jumped in it because we wanted to be part of the pilot, because we wanted to set the rules for student-based budgeting or help develop the rules for student-based budgeting. I have 10 schools. All 10 schools are in it. So we're all going through it at the same time. It's a matter of prioritizing, a matter of sharing, a matter of thinking differently. Okay? Maybe I had an instructional coach this year and I can't afford an instructional coach. So me and the school down the road have to share that instructional coach. Or maybe I had a counselor and I can't afford a counselor. So maybe I have to share it with another school. Or I need this teacher instead of whatever. They're making all the decisions in the personnel. As Philip said, it's nothing new for the principals to make decisions on personnel. They've always made it in the past. They are sent, the teachers and the people that work in their districts, their support staff, and they make the decisions as long as these people were certified. And that was the only time we overruled them at the central office. If they weren't a certified teacher or certified for the particular position they were making. The only thing, the money is tight. Some schools had to struggle. We had to put some added weight-ons on the smaller schools because you might have third grade at a small school with 38 students or 36 students. Well, you don't want to put one teacher there, so you have to have additional teachers. So we do have to put some add-ons in different places and adjust it. The only thing I need to look at and to see how much time it's going to take with the principals. The principals have been working with the business department and the business manager and accountants and making these decisions on what they're going to do. And I want to see how much time this is going to involve in our principals throughout the year. So it's going to be quite interesting looking at this, and hopefully we'll be successful.
Excellent reports. Any comments, board members?
I just have a couple of questions. I mean, we started back on student-based budgeting quite a while ago, and I do appreciate the districts that have engaged on this. And you're right, you get to shape and set the rules, as a pilot district. That's and I understand that it takes a certain type of leader and business manager and principals to be willing to think differently and to act differently, and I commend both your districts for doing that. Is there, you said all really strong positive things. Is there anything that either BESE or the department could be doing to further support the work that the challenge that you've taken on around this? And if there is, we're here to help you. I know you've heard that before.
Unless you want to send some money, I mean, we'll always take that.
Well,
we've got support from Beth and from
Yeah.
Charlotte. Whenever we pick up the phone, they've helped us out as much as we could, as much as they could, and worked with us.
Has it resulted in the shifting of dollars, more dollars to the classroom or to the school? I think that's the ultimate goal, right, with student-based budgeting, is to be able to more strategically allocate resources and put as much as you can closest to the child. Do you see that happening yet in your budgeting? And in your experience?
Well, I would answer that yes, but I wouldn't want to say that it was more so than it was the previous year.
If there were more money, there would be.
That's my point. I was trying to figure out a way to say that politely and nicely, that when you're on a shoestring budget, there's not a lot of flexibility. You know, there's just not. Once you meet all the bare necessities and your revenues are consumed, well, you've met all bare necessities and your revenues are consumed.
Do you see the flexibility coming through the ESEA waiver to be able to maybe provide some relief?
I think that actually is going to be a very beneficial move for all districts. We were probably a little bit ahead of that curve because we were anticipating some of that, hoping that would happen. But yeah, that fits very well with student-based budgeting and concept.
It does, philosophically. Okay.
Yes.
What I'm seeing is all schools are unique, so some schools have more needs than the others. So in the past, if you were giving one position to a particular school, then the other school says, well, I need this position also, but they may not need that position, because one school may be more at risk, and it needs additional help. And so with the student-based budget, it sort of helps to even this out. So
Mr.
you
Lee?
don't have to do that.
Mr. Lee?
Yeah.
Ms. Ciano, what is the process for taking the lessons learned from the pilot and making it available to all the districts?
Well, what we have included for your review today is a draft of a handbook, and we will continue to work with the districts this summer just to get some final thoughts from them. And then that handbook will be available on the website, as well as, I believe, I'll try to work through the new structure of the department to make sure that the program staff that we were working with the districts know about this opportunity. We've done that in the past with other staff in the department, so that if a district is in a position to perhaps want to do it, or it might be something we would advise that they would look at, we'll have the tools necessary and available for them.
Any other comments by board members? Ms. Beebe?
Well, I do want to commend the superintendents for being the risk takers, and certainly this was a new venture, and certainly being a part of the pilot, you will give us information moving forward. I did hear you, Superintendent Martinez, there were 10 schools in your district involved in the pilot?
Yes, ma'am.
And Superintendent Morton, 4. Okay, moving forward, and I understand because I can relate to the autonomy with the exception of requiring the certification. I mean, that's something I will stand hard fast to, but principals have had the autonomy for years to make decisions regarding personnel. But moving forward, if someone wants to be with regard to the extending the school day, and that would certainly have an impact on bus routes. Have you had discussions about the challenges, or do you see us going to that extent, to where there would be greater autonomy in the way of rearranging the school schedule, making allowances for transportation decisions, and so forth?
And I can't speak for Philip, but extending the school day, I mean, we've got buses that run primary, middle, and high school, so that would almost be impossible. What we could do is possibly have, we'd have to extend it long enough where the buses would come later in the day when they finish running their regular routes to do that. But there's no additional money giving you that to do those sort of things right now.
In your case?
In my case. I don't have any additional money in my case.
Okay. All right. So have you, in your discussions with your principal, and of course I read the supporting documentation, but moving forward with the teacher evaluation and the time involved, have you had any concerns identified regarding the time involved in student-based budgeting decisions and so forth?
Go ahead.
What we plan to do with that is, as I said earlier, we realize we're fairly close to student-based budgeting, and we're going to even continue that even with greater fidelity in the future. But I've almost come to the conclusion that the actual book work, we'll continue doing that for the principals. Quite honestly, they don't want to do it. We want to empower them and let them, what truly makes the decision is going to have the importance and the power of what they're doing. But try to make, I have 43 schools and have every principal trying to be an accountant track for everything, we've decided that's probably not logistically sound. Although we like the concept and the philosophy, we're probably going to continue to push the pencil for them and track those things for them. Because their time, I want them spent more in the classroom, interacting with faculty and students in the community in positive ways than trying to be accountants, because they're not accountants primarily. That's not what they do, and that's not really a vision I have for them being accountants.
And I totally agree with what he's saying. They haven't spent a lot of time, the accountants. The business department has worked out the figures for them. They know how much money they have. They know how much each person on the staff costs, because a teacher with a master's degree in 30 years costs more than the first-year teacher, and they know all of that. So they're making their decisions based on what monies they have, and the accountants are doing everything else. So I don't see them spending a lot of time, but we will monitor that situation closely.
Thank you.
I too appreciate two successful, experienced superintendents being willing to volunteer to be a part of this pilot, and I think you are seeing some benefits from it. And any other discussion by any other?
I just want to recognize, I believe, Mr. Chairman and Superintendent, if it's okay with you, I do believe we also have some staff from Terrebonne Parish who's here as well, who may have been involved in the pilot. I just wanted to recognize them as well. Is that correct, Superintendent?
Yes, sir. Thank you, John.
Of course.
Good.
Thank you all very much for being here.
Good. If there's no further discussion, the chair would ask, is there any objection to the motion to receive? Hearing none, motion carries. Next item.
Your next item is item 4.2 on page 161, a consideration of the MFP accountability report, and the department recommendation is to approve.
Chair would entertain a motion to approve the MFP accountability report.
I'll move.
I'll second.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Okay. There's hearing none. Is there any objection to the motion? Motion carries.
Mr. Chairman, I just have a question about how this is disseminated and who actually receives it. This MFP accountability report is a result of a resolution, right? So this is presented to the legislature, correct? There was some issues and questions around testimony during the last session about we actually present documentation, but it doesn't always get into the hands of lawmakers. Is there any way to improve on that process or to ensure that it is getting into the hands, that we don't have the kind of conversations that we had in the last session?
We usually send this over to the chairman of the committees as detailed out in the law. We also are required not to send hard copies most of the time because of the rules and the bills that say we should do everything electronically. So we have in the past sent out information to them just about the link where it's posted on our website. We can certainly investigate if
No,
there's
I'm not
anything
suggesting
else.
that we go back to
Okay.
paper copies, I think, but when it's provided to the chairman, do the staff of that committee, are they required to forward that to each member of the committee?
I'm not familiar with how they disseminate it, but we can
Because
encourage
that seemed to
them.
be a disconnect. And also, which committee chairmen receive this? Is it only the money committees?
It's House and Senate Education for sure.
Okay.
I think it's,
Beth, also, is there a way to send an electronic copy rather than just where it's located? I know the volume is a lot, but is there a way to send that so that we can send it to each, if that was?
true, yeah, right. We'll look into that to make sure that there's, minimizes the miscommunication or lack of them receiving the information. We'll look into that.
Okay, thank you.
Did you want to make a comment? Okay, any other discussion? And I think we've already taken action to receive the report.
I believe we did.
Next item.
The next item is 5.1 on page 257, a consideration of federal, state grants and allocations to LEA's Type 2 charters, approved non-public schools, and community-based organizations. The department recommendation is to approve. I move approval.
I'll second.
We have a motion and a second to approve the recommendation. Any discussion? On the $96.5 million, that doesn't call for much discussion.
What, Mr. Lee, what is the process for the recommendation that's presented here? How is that determined?
Comes through the department? Is that correct?
We actually look at these individual allocations based on the funds available. We verify that these are the methodologies that need to be used for each of the allocations, and then we present them to the board even before, as long as they're recommended for approval, we present them to the board. Otherwise, we would vet everything in the department before recommending approval.
But there are processes associated with each grant that the grant mandates we go through. And some it's a competitive process, and some it's a formula process.
Right.
Yeah. Okay, if there's no discussion, any objection? Motion carries. Next item.
The next item is 5.2 on page 292. Consideration of contracts and leases of $50,000 and over. And the department recommendation is to approve.
Okay.
Move approval of contracts items 1 through 12.
Okay, we have a motion. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Have a motion and a second to approve the contracts that are over $50,000. Any discussion?
Mr. Lee.
Ms. Beebe.
While, and I think Superintendent White, you're aware of the LaSord contract. It's not, as I understand, it expires June 30th, and I'm just asking, why was that not a part of this agenda?
Well, we're deciding whether or not to renew that contract. We haven't finalized the IDEA budget, and we'll certainly keep the board apprised of that. Obviously, if the contract were renewed, we'd bring it back in front of the board. It's not a small consideration, given how expensive it is. It's a $1.5 million contract that affects, I believe, 25 schools. It's a significant investment for a relatively small number of schools. And I think the question that we're wrestling with is, given how expensive it is it something that we should or shouldn't propose to the board that we do? And it's certainly not to say that we haven't, we've said no, it just isn't included today because we just haven't made that recommendation as of yet. Now, I think it's also worth saying that the objective, which is the proper training of teachers of students with autism, couldn't be more important. It's just a question of whether or not, given the limited scope of the program and given how large the investment is, whether or not it's the right way to do it.
Mr. Garland.
Mr. Lee,
Oh,
yes,
wait, I'm
as a-
sorry. Ms. Beebe, will you finish?
Well, and I certainly advocate the program because we do need more teacher training and the technical support for our teachers, not only special education teachers, but regular education teachers, and that was one of the reasons I chose to pursue the additional certification in special education, is because I wanted to know how to work with children with disabilities assigned to me in the regular setting. I think it's a viable program. It's one that certainly we should give consideration to. And what is of utmost concern is that we have personnel involved. And so my specific question to you, what is the procedure if we move away, if we choose to terminate the contract, or if we choose to extend the contract, what is the turnaround time? We do not meet until August again. What do we do in that lapse of time, during that time lapse?
Well, there are a number of contracts that we would be proposing again in August. You're right that there would be some lapse because this contract ends, but we would be signaling to the group either prior to or thereabouts June 30th as to whether or not we are going to propose to BESE that the contract be extended. We are walking through the IDEA budget to make our final plans for next year, and we'll bring the appropriate contracts to BESE at the next meeting. I do want to stress that we don't for a second think that having these teachers go untrained is the right thing. It's not. the thing that we're struggling with is this is a grant that staffs 5 facilitators and then 1 admin person. It covers roughly 25 schools in 9 parishes, but it costs $1.75 million. And we're not condemning the program at all. It's a fantastic program from what everyone says. The question that we have is, could we be doing something on a broader basis than only 9 parishes, only 25 teachers, and only roughly 120 students, for a $1.75 million investment? That's our question. It's complex. It's come to our attention. We're wrestling with it, and we'll bring a recommendation to the board.
And I think Mr. Lee has some experience with the LaSword project in your district. Mr. Lee, do you think it's a viable program? And
Well, it works well, very well. But like Superintendent White says, I think they have a responsibility to look at it from a cost-effective standpoint. But it's no doubt they provide good service.
Let me just, if I might just add some background to this. I think that part of the student-based budgeting question, part of the waiver discussion, and part of the kind of overall empowerment question is, to what degree should we be holding our federal monies centrally versus to what degree should we be giving them to districts to do what they think is best for their given circumstances? And so I think that, on some issues like this, it's important that there be central programs that are run, but frankly, our orientation is generally going to be, we think it's best for districts to have the resources so that they can do what's necessary for their kids. And so where we see programs that are expensive, no matter the cause, but that affect a very limited number of our parishes and teachers, we're going to ask difficult questions, because to me, the question is, could we take what is $600,000 per year and share it more broadly across people who are closer to kids than to fund one contract that affects a smaller number of teachers? That's really what we're wrestling with here.
And I hate to pit programs against programs or what have you, but I mean, we just approved a program to address 124 students to the tune of $1.1 million. So, I mean, but regardless, the money, IDEA, it's federal. So I think regardless of the funding source, if we're going to use that as an argument that we need to be responsible in our decision-making and the services provided to children, I certainly feel the fact that we're addressing the students' needs, those classified with autism. And beyond that, it's just not the autistic students, but we're helping. It makes a difference even as we have the discussions with teachers of regular students. I think it's a viable program, and hope that you, Mr. White, will give consideration to renewing the contract.
And to be clear, on that, the program that you referenced, we're phasing that program out. So, but it'll be funded, but it's being phased out.
Mr. Garvin.
Yes, as a follow-up on that item, I have a question either for the superintendent or for Ms. Destu. We have a process in place for some types of contracts to get approved in between BESE meetings. Is this the kind of contract that can be approved in between BESE meetings if we absolutely need it to be approved?
I'm going to defer to Ms. Ciano. Does this meet the parameters of the interim kind of authority, or are we going beyond that time frame that authority was created for?
Well, we have standing approval authority for contracts under $250,000. However, anything beyond that needs the special provision whereby there's a committee set up, and we actually have engaged that committee for contracts of this value, as was in place between the April and the June meeting.
But that expires, correct?
Right, it expires at June 30th.
Okay, so this one wouldn't apply there.
No, we would not be able to approve this under the current authorities existing.
Correct.
But the
until
next
the
BESE
August meeting.
Next BESE meeting is August?
Is August.
What?
16, 17,
Roughly.
18?
So
Mid-August.
after school starts, but not too far into the year. I'd like to ask a question of Superintendent White. If you decide not to go forward with renewing this contract, could you give the BESE members a written description of how you are going to address the issue of teaching these teachers without the contract?
I'd be happy to. It's probably best done in the context of the overall IDEA budget, however, because I think we really need to ask ourselves, should the State Department be responsible for professional development for a small number of our teachers? And maybe the answer is yes, but by and large, the answer is no. And the reason for that is that our orientation has been to try to put as many resources in the hands of people closer to those students as possible. So I'm happy to do it, but I don't want to commit to the idea that the state should be responsible for training teachers. I think we should be building capacity within districts to either locate groups or to do that themselves.
I understand. But I would appreciate some kind of written explanation of what is going to happen, because there's a lot of parents asking.
Understood, yeah.
If this doesn't get renewed, what's going to happen?
Yeah, we'll do that.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, I have a question. Currently, the contract is with an outside entity, correct? Is it LSU that
Yes.
that receives this contract, and then they in turn are providing the professional development to teachers?
Yes.
Is that correct? Okay. I would echo what Mr. Garvey said, is that I think I've heard from all 25 schools that benefit from this program, and they're very supportive. So I still would defer to your administrative authority on these kind of decisions and making this recommendation, but communication to the board on this item, I think, is critical.
It will be done.
Let me ask this question. Would you want to consider a motion to grant the emergency authority if the superintendent so recommends?
That excellent idea. Yeah, I'd like to make that motion.
And I second.
Okay.
So
Well,
you would extend to the existing finance subgroup this authority until the August meeting, is that correct? On just this item, or for any
well,
item?
they would
The motion is for this item.
they would give the approval, and then it would come back here for.
So it's for this item only, and it would come back to the board in August? Okay.
Okay. Any further discussion on that motion? Any objection?
Mr. Lee, I don't want to beat a dead horse, but once again, moving forward with planning for those individuals involved in the historic project, I don't know the ramifications for them waiting until August to find out whether or not.
This gives authority for the superintendent.
To make it
So
through
in other
this
words,
committee.
we'll just ratify it in August, is that what
Right,
you think?
that's correct.
if he brings it forward to committee, you just authorize the finance subcommittee to only act on this one item up until the August meeting, and you would ratify it. But again, there would be communication to the board. Yeah.
Okay, if there's no further.
I do have a question. Mr. Lee?
What's your question? What's your question?
I think Ms. Bofi has a
Pardon me?
Ms. Bofi goes before me.
Okay. Holly?
Thank you. So, this is my understanding. I just want to check. So we are looking at the IDEA budget, and I appreciate you taking a careful look and thinking about impacts of the different programs. And also thinking about districts being in a position to best train their teachers or make decisions about how their teachers are trained. Could the districts create this contract themselves? Could the districts come together and collaboratively to get this kind of work accomplished? Okay. And then how does the IDEA budget, is that limited to just the state doling out the funds, or are those funds that the state can say, you know what, if we're giving you this responsibility, then we can pass money down to you to make good decisions about how to use that money?
Well, by and large, the dollars, there's discretion over who spends those dollars, not entirely, but by and large. And I am going to suggest to the board that we take a position that where there is discretion, that those dollars be in the hands of schools and school districts rather than in central run programs. And, you know, I'll just tell you candidly, our analysis of the federal programs budget at present indicates that we have a pretty large, not large in the aggregate, but percentage-wise number of kind of items that we're spending centrally and then giving to districts rather than taking the dollars and giving them to districts and saying, how would you best spend them? And sometimes that's the right call, but I think probably it merits another look, and that's that's what this is a result of. So yes, they could do it. I think we should do as much of that as possible.
Okay. Any further discussion?
So,
Any objection to the motion on the floor?
I believe we actually have two motions currently on the floor.
No, we approved that first one, didn't we?
I do not believe we did. So if we
Okay,
could,
okay, if we didn't, then the first motion,
yes,
To-
to
to-
approve the contract.
right,
And we have a motion and a second.
and I think we did have discussion on it. Okay, is any objection to that motion? Motion carries. Now, the second motion,
Now, the second motion, as I understand it, is that if the superintendent recommends approval of the Lassard contract, the board,
with the committee's
with
approval.
the committee's approval,
Then it would come.
and the board president, then it will have emergency authority and will come back to the board for ratification
And-
in August.
That's
And
correct.
if there is,
That would keep it from terminating if
Correct.
that decision is made.
correct.
Okay. Any further discussion on that? Any objection? Motion carries. Next item.
Item 5.4 is on page 331. It is a consideration of fiscal dialogues as a result of the fiscal risk assessment process, and the department recommendation is to approve.
Okay. Page 331.
So moved.
We have a motion, approval of the fiscal risk assessment process. Is there a
Second.
And a second. Any discussion? Since none of us know what that means, I don't think there can be much discussion.
Mr. Lee, some of us know what it means.
Okay. Any objection? Motion carries. Next item.
The next item is 6.2 on page 355, a consideration of RSD contracts and leases of $50,000 and over, and the department recommendation is to approve.
Chair would entertain a motion. We have a motion, kind of
I'll
weak,
second.
and a second. Any discussion? Contracts and leases over 50,000. This is Recovery School District. Any discussion?
Mr. Lee,
Uh,
So-
Ms. Beebe.
as, I know we have the supporting documentation, and I would assume that this is, the recommendation of Superintendent White, but, and it's just, I guess my question is.
It's here for your discussion and/or approval as
You can ask questions.
recommended by the motion.
These,
Well, these are all approved by, now, under the Recovery School District, have Superintendent Dobor and Mr. White, you give your blessings to all of that. Is this the procedure? Because although I've been on BESE, what, about 6
Yes.
months?
Yes,
I
if
want to
it,
understand
when
the
it,
procedure. So Mr. Dobor makes these recommendations?
Mr. Dobart reports to the state superintendent, the state superintendent reports to this board. And
And
when
Mr.
this
Chairman?
recommendation is made, in effect, it's a recommendation of the state superintendent.
and I would like to add that the board met in the New Orleans, the Recovery School District, and we actually did take action and approve these items. So there's been a layer of a board meeting on these items.
And if I may add to Ms. Dashew's comment, for a period of about 4 to 5 minutes, and it was over, I mean, you know, they were presented, no discussion, and I'm just not accustomed to approving without having explanations offered. And yes, I can read, but, and I see the information presented, and I certainly commend staff. It's not it's not my intent to create any negatives towards staff. It's just, this is a lot of money, and so I'm just assuming to understand the process. Superintendent Dobor reviews it, and then he makes the recommendation to you, Superintendent White, and you in turn, you recommend it to us?
Yes, I mean, there's also a bid process on all of these, that there's, so state laws govern the procurement process that these then are put through. So I think it's fair to say, Ms. Beebe, that the recommendation, the choice of these vendors is not made by any individual. It's made effectively by the law, which stipulates a process that the job effectively goes to the lowest qualified bidder, and then that name is represented here. So Superintendent Dobard, his team, and I have obviously, we're bringing this recommendation to you, but only insofar as it's the result of a legally mandated process of which we had no part.
Okay. Thank you for the clarification moving forward.
Thank you.
I know the process, I now have an understanding.
Ms. BB, I think you do make a good point in that it is lots of money, just lots of money. And, you know, there's already scrutiny in the media about some of the particularly very large contracts. They're in the area of testing. But I think we do have a responsibility to ask questions, to try to be informed, because we are responsible for the expenditure of a lot of money. Okay, if there's no further discussion, any objection to the motion? If there's no objection, motion carries. Next item.
The next item is 6.4 on page 388, a consideration of a review of the 2012-2013 budget for the Recovery School District. Board members, I will point out you do have a color copy that was handed to you at the beginning of this meeting. Oh, and the department recommendation is to receive.
Okay, we have a recommendation to receive. We have a motion, and Mr. Garvey seconds. Any discussion? Any objection?
Only if you let me go back in history and talk about when these budget reviews, how this began, expanded, and now has gotten to what is really, I think, an excellent and understandable kind of
Right.
presentation.
Right.
I remember the day the RSD budget was on half a piece of paper, and so,
It-
and then when it's also 3,000 pieces of paper. So, yeah,
It has come a long way.
it has. I've been around too long.
Okay, if there's no further discussion, is there any objection to the motion to receive? Motion carries. Next item.
The next item is moving on to item 7, the standing items, Louisiana Quality Education Support Fund.
Chair would entertain a motion, preferably to receive items 7.1 through 7.7.
I make that motion in blow, to receive those in blow.
Okay, we have a motion. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Okay, we have
Mr.
a-
Chairman, we really need to commend Kim and her staff for doing such an excellent job. She has really stepped up in this role and has just made us very proud. So, good work.
Okay, we have a motion and a second to approve item 7, items 7.1 through 7.7. Any discussion? Any objection? Motion carries. Next item.
The next item is 8.2 on page 440, consideration of BESE contracts and leases, and the department recommendation is to approve.
We have a recommendation for approval of the BESE contracts.
So moved.
We have a motion. Do we have a second? This item, this group we're contracting with might be somewhat questionable, but we do have a.
Was that a joke? Okay.
Is there any discussion?
I have a question.
I'll
Maybe-
withdraw
Okay.
my recommendation.
So the contract that we just approved or get ready to approve, this is startup money for charter schools? I guess like, if it's a new charter school, BESE has authority to give them X amount of dollars to have funding? Is that correct? That's my.
Yeah, there is funding provided for the loan program. Isn't that correct, Superintendent?
Yes.
And this is giving the department authority to administer it.
Okay, and there's a process where it's the application process and I'm just trying to get clear understanding, because this is my first time ever understanding.
No, you moved ahead too.
Yes, this is a loan fund that is available to certain types of charter schools. There is a process for which to apply. We actually have to pay the loan back, so it's an interest-free loan. And this is lived in our office because that's used to run all of the charter school stuff. And we are transferring this money over to the department so that they are the ones
Page
who
440.
high school for which this is helpful and can actually help them apply and administer the loan. So this is simply a memorandum of agreement between BESE and the department for these funds.
Okay, is that, any further discussion?
Mr. Lee, I'm sorry.
Ms. Beebe?
I didn't hear Ms. Peel's question clearly, and I did get a bit of Ms. Poznak's response. So, did you ask this money as it's, reported here, 436,000, that's for startup
That's,
money
that-
for charter schools?
that's right, that's the fund that's available for startup costs, a loan fund.
And that's to those operators, the entities that would want to establish a charter school, we would give them 200, what was that dollar figure? Is it 200,000?
It was up to 100,000, I believe.
It's a loan, it's a startup loan that's been in the BESE budget for years and years. We're
Well, what I'm
transferring
saying, this is not a significant dollar amount when we're talking about 100 to 200,000 per charter operator. Am I?
You are correct. I mean, it is not a significant amount, but when you're starting up a school and it's potentially an interest-free, or it is an interest-free loan, we are starting to see that there has been more interest in it, particularly as there have been other federal grants that have run out. And so this money has actually been sitting there for quite a few years. This was actually the first year that we had a school apply and successfully apply to receive one of these loans.
But there is a limit to the dollar amount,
Yes, ma'am.
and it's interest-free? You didn't say?
It's,
Yes.
It's up to $100,000, is that correct?
And, yes, what is the payback? I mean, do you have a time? Is it 3?
Yes, they have, I believe that it's in the agreement that they have 3 years to pay back the money in installments.
I missed that. Are we prohibited from earning interest?
No, the loan actually does earn interest, whether that's swept, that interest is swept or not is at the discretion of the state.
But technically, if I want to open a charter school and I borrow 100,000,
Oh, right.
am I paying back 100,000?
No, it's for, that money is actually used to reimburse expenses. So they can't take the $100,000, put it in a bank account, and to earn interest on that money.
She
No,
needs the payback.
I mean payback.
Is there interest accrued on the payback?
Repayment.
Ms. Beebe, Pete LaFleur with BESE. The statute states that the interest, the loan is interest-free, and it was set up that way. That's what the statute's written. So
Well,
it's,
that is-
we can't pay, we can't charge interest. And it's to, as Ms. Pozniak said, is to get these charter schools started.
Okay, further discussion? Any objection to the motion on the floor? Motion carries. Next item.
Your next item is 8.3 on page 448, a consideration of BESE property, and the staff recommendation is to approve.
This is approving cooperative endeavor agreements with 2 school systems, Washita and Sabine Parish, and Chair would entertain a motion to approve both.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. These are properties that's owned by BESE, but operated by those school systems and have been for a long time. They're schools, individual school sites, small sites. Any further discussion?
Just additional clarification, Mr. Lee. So these are properties in Washita and West
in Sabine Parish.
In Sabine. And so what are we asking for here?
The recommendation is to approve what amounts to a contract. It's a cooperative endeavor agreement with those school systems where they operate those facilities
So they lease from us the building, is that what you're saying?
from BESE.
And we're asking for the approval of the lease.
Okay, any further discussion? Any objection? Motion carries. Next item.
The next item is 9.1 on page 459, a consideration of revisions to the Louisiana Administrative Code, Title 28, Part 1, also known as the BESE Code. The staff recommendation is to approve as a notice of intent.
So moved.
Okay, we have a motion and a second to approve the revisions to the administrative code.
Mr. Chairman, this is...
Somebody want to review with us what the amendments are?
Sure.
This is good.
So this is...
Briefly.
Sure. You don't have to tell me twice. And so these are a series of revisions to BESE's internal policies and code that we use. And it was last promulgated and put through to rule in 2008. And what our staff has discovered over the last year or so is that there are a number of things that are outdated throughout the code. So references to different laws that have changed, perhaps references to previous configurations of the BESE districts that changed last year with redistricting. There is a large section, for instance, taken out on the RSD because at the time that this code was put together, there were not laws that were guiding on the RSD, and actually there are now, so we should remove them from our code because statute overrides this policy. So we wanted to make sure that there wasn't any conflict that existed there. Also, there are several changes that respond to legislation regarding the special schools that came through in this last session.
Are there any changes to the policy?
No, and we very intentionally chose not to do anything that was not alignment, technical changes to this code. So there's nothing that changes that has not been prompted by some other event or law.
Okay, any discussion?
I'd just like to commend all of our staff. I can see several members' handiwork in this while reading it, and it's really, this is an arduous task, and I commend the executive director and our BESE staff for taking this on and cleaning this up.
I would also just want to acknowledge Nina for the board recorder who has collected all of these necessary changes for the last few months and actually put together the final copy of the revisions.
Any further discussion? Any objection? Motion carries. Next item.
The next item is 9.2 on page 472, consideration of revisions to Bulletin 921, the Policy and Procedure Manual for the Louisiana Quality Education Support Fund, 8G. The staff recommendation is to approve as a notice of intent.
I mean, I went over.
Okay.
Is this the same thing?
Well, actually, this bulletin has never been promulgated. So it was put together, but we actually didn't do it as a notice of intent. So we are going to go ahead and put that through the process this time.
Okay. But again, it's putting in policy our operation, our practice.
Yes, sir.
Chair would entertain a motion to approve the policy.
Motion.
I have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Any objection? Motion carries. Next item.
That concludes your agenda.
Who's chairing?
We will now be breaking for lunch,
Academic
and
goals.
academic goals will meet at 1:15.